So, just in case you missed it, here is what Donald Trump, the President of the United States, posted on Truth Social, his knockoff Twitter social media site, the other day about Russia and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and the war in Ukraine. Think of it. A modestly successful comedian, Volodymyr Zelensky, talked the United States of America into spending $350 billion to go into a war that couldn't be won, that never had to start, but a war that he, without the U.S. and Trump, will never be able to settle. The United States has spent $200 billion more than Europe, and Europe's money is guaranteed, while the United States will get nothing back. Why didn't sleepy Joe Biden demand equalization, in that this war is far more important to Europe than it is to us? We have a big, beautiful ocean as separation. On top of this, Zelensky admits that half of the money we sent him is missing. He refuses to have elections, is very low in Ukrainian polls, and the only thing he was good at was playing Biden like a fiddle. A dictator without elections, Zelensky better move fast, or he is not going to have a country left. In the meantime, we are successfully negotiating an end to the war with Russia, something all admit only Trump and the Trump administration can do. Biden never tried. Europe has failed to bring peace, and Zelensky probably wants to keep the gravy train going. I love Ukraine, but Zelensky has done a terrible job, his country is shattered, and millions have unnecessarily died. And so it continues. Think of it. A modestly successful real estate developer and reality TV show host and complete failure of a casino operator talked the United States of America into electing him President of the United States. And what about the end of this where he says, his country is shattered and millions have unnecessarily died? Are you sure you're talking about Ukraine there, Donald? This is a continuation of Trump's decades-long preoccupation with trying to convince everybody that he's the master of the deal, right? That was the title of his book, his best-selling book that sold more copies than the Bible. Ask Trump, he'll tell you. The art of the deal. Who better than Donald Trump to explain the art of the deal? It's his entire brand. The thing about Trump and deal-making is not only is he manifestly terrible at it, and if you ask most people other than him, and people who are in his cult or compromised or indebted to him in some way, they'll tell you, actually, he's really, really shitty at negotiations and making deals. Like, he's fucking horrible at it. Not only does he have that track record, but if you listen to things he has said about negotiating and deal-making in the past, and you actually pay attention to things he has done and the ways in which he has conducted himself during deal-making throughout his life, both as a business person and as a politician, you see that his fundamental concept of and approach to deal-making is deeply flawed and toxic and counterproductive. Donald Trump views deal-making as a strict, binary, 0-1, black-white, win-lose proposition. You enter into a negotiation and you are either going to win or you are going to lose. And to Donald Trump, there is no such thing as a deal where everybody comes out better than they went in, where there's a compromise that can be reached, where all parties of the deal can leave with something and be satisfied. That doesn't exist for him. It's got to be a winner and a loser. And his idea of a good deal is not what I was just describing, some kind of deal where everybody gets the best out of the negotiation that they possibly can. To Donald Trump, a good deal is when he bullies and threatens and forces the other side to accept terms that benefit Donald Trump that the other side doesn't want to accept but feel like they have no choice but to accept. That's a good deal to Donald Trump. And Everybody knows that. That's the thing. Everybody in the entire world knows that that's the kind of guy Donald Trump is, that that's what he is after when he goes into a negotiation. That's his reputation, and it very much precedes him, largely through his own doing. So how is this guy with this well-known attitude toward deal-making supposed to enter any kind of negotiation with the perception that he's entering it in good faith? It just doesn't make any sense. It's like going to a car dealership to buy a car, and the car salesman comes up to you and says, "Hey, I just want to let you know, you're buying this car today from me, and I am going to try everything I know to fuck you over as hard as I can in this deal. And I'm going to get you to pay more than you want to pay. And I'm going to get you to take home less than you wanted to take home. You are going to leave here with a more expensive, not as nice car as you came in here wanting to buy. And fuck you. I'm going to beat you in these negotiations." Is that a good salesman? That doesn't seem like a good car salesman to me. And yet that has been Donald Trump's sales pitch, as it were, to the American people, but especially to the rest of the world on behalf of the United States. The gravy train's over, folks. Even he said gravy train in that tweet or that tweet about Zelensky. The gravy train is over. All you other freeloader countries, all you other parasite countries that have been taking advantage of the United States for all these years. You've been eating free lunch on the United States' dime. Well, guess what, motherfuckers? From now on, we're changing the menu. And the only thing on the menu is a shit sandwich. And you're going to pay for it. And you're going to eat it. And you're going to like it. That's how Donald Trump talks about other countries, including our closest allies and our most reliable trading partners. That's how he talks to these people. But he's the great deal maker? Another flaw in this illusion that Trump is the master deal maker is, and again, this is behavior that he himself has talked about on occasion and has demonstrated through his actions over and over again. He doesn't even really care about whether or not he gets a good deal for his side or not. Because if he doesn't get the deal he wants, he'll just lie and say that he did. If he loses, he'll claim victory. So it really doesn't make any difference. How many times has he told that kind of a lie in public? When he was running for president, I think it was when he was running for president the first time in 2016, might even have been during the Republican primaries. He said, "Oh, people sue me all the time. I'm always involved in lawsuits, but I never settle lawsuits." Lie. He settles lawsuits all the time. "I always fight. I always go to court, and I always win." Lie. He loses lawsuits a lot. He loses in court in general, whether it's a civil action or a criminal one. He loses a lot because not only is he a criminal and a fraud, but he's really bad at it. He's an incompetent criminal and fraud, and it's usually pretty obvious that, yeah, he did the shit he's being accused of doing. But it doesn't matter to him. He'll just come out and say, "I won! Victory! We got the deal," right? He did that just recently with Canada and Mexico. Threatening Canada and Mexico, our neighbors, the only two countries that we share land borders with. And he threatened them with tariffs over imaginary bullshit stuff. With Mexico, it was the continued harping and exaggerating and overblowing of the immigration thing. With Canada, it was also the immigration thing and also fentanyl, which is not remotely a problem coming from Canada, but that's what he said. And then after he threatened them with tariffs, like the next day, he came out and said, "Actually, we're not going to do the tariffs. We're going to pause the tariffs because I got concessions from Canada and Mexico. They folded, they caved because I'm Donald Trump. I'm the master deal maker. I'm the great negotiator." And the president of Mexico agreed to deploy additional Mexican troops to the border to help us police the border from the Mexican side. And Canada agreed to crack down on fentanyl crossing the border. And then you read into it a little bit. You do 30 seconds of research and you find that the supposed concession he got from Mexico was the exact same thing Mexico agreed to do in collaboration with President Biden a few years ago, and the Canadian so-called concession that he won as a result of his master negotiating skills was something that the Canadian government had already pledged to do back in December before he threatened them with tariffs and supposedly extracted this great deal. But he claimed victory anyway. He just lies. If he doesn't get the deal he wants, he doesn't get the outcome he wants, he just lies and says he did get it. And for his supporters, or at least for a large enough number of his supporters, that's good enough. But here's something I have noticed about this Ukraine and Russia thing, is that there have been tiny little cracks forming. There have been at least the initial appearances of some waning enthusiasm for Trump among congressional Republicans. Not very much, and not the sort of thing that you would necessarily expect that it's going to go anywhere or last very long. But I did see that Republican senators like Thune and Hawley and Kennedy have spoken to the media in recent days and have contradicted Trump's description of Zelensky as a dictator, and have said that any negotiation to end the war in Ukraine needs to include Ukraine, because it's just absurd to even suggest that, oh, the United States and Russia are going to negotiate an end to the war in Ukraine and Ukraine's not invited, right? There are even Republican senators who have been doing nothing but kiss Trump's ass for years have felt the need to come out and say, no, we need to have Ukraine present at the negotiations when we're trying to figure out how to end the war that started when Russia invaded their country. They need to be at the table for this. And Senator Kennedy, who is absolutely fucking worthless, who is in a chamber filled with worthless, awful, contemptible Republicans. He is near the top of the list, just an absolutely useless senator. He went out of his way to say that not only did he contradict some of the other things that Trump said about Zelensky and the war in Ukraine, he said Vladimir Putin is a gangster. Let's not forget, Vladimir Putin is a gangster. And this is the guy that Trump is befriending and sucking up to and choosing to ally himself with instead of Volodymyr Zelensky. So there are some cracks forming. Now, again, do I think that it's going to go anywhere? I don't know. Probably not. But it's not just those Republican senators and a few others who have been making these noises that sound, if you tilt your head and you cup your hand to your ear, it sounds a little bit like disagreement with Trump, right? It's not just them, it's also Mark Levin. And this has been the most surprising to me, because his objection and his sort of rebuke to Trump's comments about Zelensky and Ukraine was the most detailed, the most unapologetic. And it still isn't right to call it an attack on Trump. It's an attack on Trump very indirectly, and almost apologetic when he gets close to actually directly addressing Trump, which he never does. But when he gets close to it, he adopts kind of a more apologetic tone. But apart from that, he goes into a lot of detail, correcting a lot of the factual inaccuracies and mischaracterizations that Trump makes about Zelensky and Ukraine in that Truth Social post. And for those of you who don't know who I'm talking about, Mark Levin is a conservative radio host and a Fox News host. He's like a Hannity understudy. So that's how far down the pecking order we're going here with Mark Levin. He's not even Hannity level. He's like sub-Hannity. He's the guy who comes on after Hannity on the radio, right? But he's been around for years. I've mentioned him in videos a time or two over the years. He's not a major figure, but he's a major enough figure that he's got a decent-sized radio audience. And he's been invited to the White House before, and he's interviewed Trump before. And he's a fairly successful right-wing radio host. And a Fox News contributor, and he is, like the rest of these guys, he's a fucking goon. He himself is not a reliable source or a good person to turn to, or someone that we should either be seeking out or expecting as an ally for our side. He's not a good guy at all. But he did say this on his radio show the other day about Donald Trump and his comments about Volodymyr Zelensky. And I'm not going to play you the audio. I'm going to spare you having to listen to Mark Levin's voice. And if you've ever heard Mark Levin's voice, you'll understand the gift I'm giving you right now. I'm just going to read you a transcript of what Mark Levin said on his radio show. And this was transcribed by the website Joe My God. And it was also reported by Mediaite. So this is what Mark Levin said on his radio show the other day. I don't have a problem if it's the position of our administration to cut back on support for Ukraine, which I oppose, by the way. Then so be it. Elections have consequences, so be it. But I want to make sure the facts are on the table, and you, the American people, draw your own conclusion. MAGA doesn't support Putin. I want to stop right there. Are you sure about that, Mark? I mean, maybe you don't support Putin, and if you don't, good for you. But are you sure that MAGA doesn't support Putin? You might like to think so, but I wouldn't bet too much money on that. I'm just saying. Zelensky ordered martial law. That's what the Constitution there compelled. Zelensky hasn't called for an election. That's what the Constitution there compels. Now, I'm waiting for the first free election for Vladimir Putin. I mean, this is almost comical in a sick way, that Putin is demanding an election. Why is he demanding an election in Ukraine when he doesn't have free and real elections in his own country? And why does he get to call the shots when, in fact, he murders people who dare to challenge him? This is what we're dealing with. Again, old KGB, and not just KGB, Putin, was in like Flynn with the Stasi in East Germany. So I don't know why there are people that not only oppose Zelensky, but seem to support Putin. Again, just to pause real quick, do you really not know, Mark? Do you really not know why people, and I believe he's indirectly referring to Trump there, really not know why there are people, including the President of the United States, Donald Trump, who support Putin instead of Zelensky? Is that really a mystery? Come on. You're being refreshingly honest in a lot of this. The point about how dare they call for Zelensky to hold elections when they're carrying water for Putin, who never has elections in Russia, pointing out that hypocrisy? Good point. Great point. But let's hold on to that. Let's keep pushing in that direction. Let's not undermine that by then pretending that you don't understand why Donald Trump and others on your side would support Vladimir Putin instead of Zelensky. Come on. The parliament, with all parties in the parliament, support what he's doing. They're trying to survive. Ukraine did not invade Russia. Russia invaded Ukraine. But the idea that Ukraine must hold elections in violation of its own constitution as a condition for peace, or that Ukraine must give up more territory as a condition for peace, you have to understand the Ukrainian people don't want to do that. That's why Zelensky is at 57% approval rating, higher than most politicians in our own country. And again, that was from Mark Levin on his radio show the other day. And he has obviously not broken with Trump permanently on this. If he meant to make a break with Trump over this definitively, he would have mentioned Trump's name during that, even though a lot of it was clearly directed at Trump or in response to things that Trump has said. He would have mentioned Trump by name. He would have called him out. He would have said who he was correcting when he was correcting all those lies that Trump told about Ukraine and Zelensky. So Levin hasn't broken with Trump permanently. He's still a dishonest hack and a grifter. This is a guy, Mark Levin, who, when Barack Obama was president, Levin would routinely describe Barack Obama as a Stalinist, not a communist, like many people on the right called Obama, not even a Marxist, like many other people on the right also called Obama, specifically a Stalinist. And he said this over and over again on his radio show, did Mark Levin. Barack Obama and his administration, they were Stalinists. So Mark Levin is a dipshit and a grifter and a hack. And he knows that his audience is full of ride or dies for Trump, and he's not going to say anything too anti-Trump because he doesn't want to run off his audience and take money out of his own pocket any more than Hannity would, or Ben Shapiro would, or Tucker Carlson, or fucking Gutfeld, or any of the rest of these right-wing shitheads would. He's being as brave and as honest as he feels he can get away with being. But even so, when you're Donald Trump, and you've lost the support of a shameless right-wing demagogue like Mark Levin, even if it is just on a single issue, that's a sign that you have overreached yourself. Trump's reckless, reprehensible betrayal of Volodymyr Zelensky and his embrace of Putin threatens obviously the people of Ukraine and the whole of Europe. And it's so indefensible that finally even some Republicans are starting to kind of push back against it a little bit. Although they're also careful to try and offset their criticisms of Trump with a generous portion of groveling too. Like all those senators I mentioned who criticized or kind of sort of criticized things that Trump has said about Ukraine. They made sure to immediately follow that up by saying, but I think the president's the right man for the job, and I think the president wants to end the war, and I'm totally in support of that, and I just think he's doing a really good job, and we need to trust him and let him do his thing. Like, so I'm not trying to give him too much credit here. Maybe if this continues, if Trump doesn't make any kinds of changes to this, and he goes on insisting that we need to be in lockstep with Putin and we need to decide the fate of Ukraine without allowing the government and the people and the president of Ukraine to have any say in it. Maybe if this continues, those cracks in the foundation, those cracks in the unity of the Republican Party can widen a bit, and Democrats in Congress or somebody can take advantage of that, can exploit that Republican disharmony and prevent Trump from doing too much damage. But, that's probably wishful thinking on my part. As long as he's the president, Donald Trump will continue to behave this way, to act as though Ukraine and the rest of Europe and the rest of the world should be grateful that he's here. Should be grateful that he's on the scene to fix everything as only he can, because he's the great deal maker, right? He's convinced himself of that. He's spent his entire public life, stretching back decades and decades, trying desperately to convince everyone else of it too. He's the deal master. That's who he is. That's who he wants you to think he is. He's the art of the deal guy. And he's got a hell of a deal for Ukraine and Gaza, let's not forget. And most of all, for us here in the United States. But to quote a man who Trump would undoubtedly dismiss as a DEI hire, this deal is getting worse all the time.